Hey up you lot. So, yeah, some affordable new wave stuff, vintage new wave. What prompted this video is I managed to pick up a couple of Clash albums to fill gaps in my collections, and I think the first pressings. I picked them up last week, and they were really cheap. Like £4 cheap, in really good nick, like super top nick. I was staggered, and I actually got them from a record shop as well. And I was really amazed, because it's like, yeah, punk is expensive now, but not all of it. So I thought, I had a little rummage through my record collection and had a little browse on Discogs and thought, what is actually affordable? I admit, it's pretty much the new wave end of it all. And new wave was an odd beast. I love punk. I love the frenetic energy of the Clash. I love all that about punk. I love the politics and the drive for change and standing up and having a voice. And I think when new wave came along, it was like a mix of punk and pop. So it had some of the energy of punk, but you could tell a lot of new wave bands had their sights set on being on top of the pops. So I've picked 10 really good kind of, not necessarily punk, but punk and new wave albums that are all under a £5 on Discogs or cheap in record shops, or that you can find for a really decent price. Now, they're in no particular order. I've done them in chronological order, so the year that they came out. And if there's anything you love on this video, that's awesome. If there's anything that you hate and you're like, that's not even punk or new wave, then fair dues. Like, it's all just everybody's individual opinion, isn't it? And that's cool. So, let's get into it and have a little look. Like, the first one, let's go back to 77, the year that punk broke. I was amazed how cheap this record is. So, it's New Boots and Panties by Ian Dury and the Blockheads. Now, I'm in a couple of punk groups on Facebook. And whenever anybody posts any, like, early stuff that isn't that's kind of like Ian Dury, Elvis Costello, all that kind of stuff that was edgy, new wave, punky, pub rock, power pop type stuff, loads of people comment and go, this isn't punk. But the whole movement had the core drives like the Damned and the Pistols, and then there was like more kind of peripheral bands that were swept up along with that whole punk movement, and I think Ian Dury and the Blockheads were one of them. Now, this is a corking album. So with all these records, if there's any that you don't know that you think, well, I might get that because it's cheap, check it out online. They're all on YouTube or Spotify. I've not picked anything super obscure that you're not going to be able to find digitally. So Ian Dury and the Blockheads brought like that punk energy and ethos, but merged like funk and all sorts of crazy stuff in with it. They were absolutely amazing. So kind of more up-tempo, angrier tracks on this. You've got Sweet Gene Vincent, and when that kicks off, oh, that's awesome. Blackmail Man. Blockheads. Blockheads has always been a favourite of mine. And somebody only has to say, shoes like dead pigs' noses, and I'm smirking like a loon. This one is really affordable on Discogs. This one's a weird German pressing that for some reason has got a bonus track, Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll. But well worth listening to, and super cheap on vinyl. Next up, bit of a controversial one, because there's somebody in this band that people don't like. And it is the first album by the Boomtown Rats, again, 1977. Don't forget they were there in 77. And if you look back and compare them to the Pistols, the Damned, the Clash, even bands like UK Subs and that. These guys very obviously had their eyes set on getting on top of the pops. It's not frenetic punk, it's new wave, power pop, hummable stuff. This first album, I think, is one of their best. I do really like Tonic for the Troops. Now, I know in more recent years, Bob Geldof is a figure of... He receives a lot of, like, vitriolic ire from people, doesn't he? But I'm not, like, commenting on that, and I'm not judging one way or another. I like this record, and that's cool. You've got some really cool ones. Looking After Number One, Kicks, the kind of questionable Mary of the Fourth Form, which is a difficult thing sometimes to... when you're looking back at older music and there's references to that. It's kind of like I always remember growing up listening to my mum listening to like 60s music, and I always thought Gary Puckett and the Union Gap, Young Girl, always made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. Just a little bit like, it's a good pop song, and I'm sure it was great at the time and everybody listened to it and danced to it. Just with like hindsight, sometimes you can look at something like that and kind of go, yeah. Again, super cheap on Discogs. All the Rat stuff is. And although they went towards the end of their kind of late 70s, early 80s period, they did go very poppy. This is a pretty cool album. But again, don't forget, they kind of didn't have the wah of punk. They obviously had their sights set on top of the pops, which is fair enough. One band I really love their early stuff, and again, it's cheap as chips. This is 1978 now. Tom Robinson Band. This is their first album, Power in the Darkness. And it's kind of very guitar-orientated, punky new wave. You've got, like, more up-tempo stuff like Grey Cortina, Winter of 79, stuff like that. Very, very political, which I do like. A lot of punk shaped my politics as a teenager, and I'd listen to songs about things by punk and new wave bands and kind of think, that's a bit weird, what was going on there? And I'd find out about, you know, the politics behind the song, and that did shape my politics as a youth a lot, which has obviously stayed with me as an adult. But again, tremendously cheap on Discogs and in record shops, and if you can find it in good condition, it's well worth picking up. My lad's 19 now, and he loves like the original 77 punk stuff, Damned being one of his biggest favourites. And he loves this album, so there's something that, you know, there's something obviously that still endures with Tom Robinson Band. We'll have a compilation next from 1970, I think this is 79. Let's have a little quick check. 78. I've got them in the wrong order, but it's right. Live Stiffs. Again, this is a couple of quid on Discogs. This is the Music for Pleasure reissue. But there isn't a lot of audible difference in this one and the original Stiff issue. So if you don't know, Stiff was a very, very, very cool record label that started putting out punk stuff and then drifted into pub rock, new wave, all sorts of really, really cool stuff. And it's almost like a cult label, but I love Stiff stuff. So this is, apparently they filmed this tour, and what the Stiff guys always did, the Stiff artists, is they'd all play on each other's records. So Ian Jury would play the drums on Elvis Costello records, and Nick Lowe would produce and then play the bass on other people's records and stuff, and you've got little lovely little Reckless Eric. You can't go wrong with something that's got Reckless Eric on. So these are all live versions, and you've got Nick Lowe, Reckless Eric, Larry Wallace, who was in Pink Fairies, I think. I've got some Pink Fairies stuff in one of my psychedelic boxes. Elvis Costello and Ian Dury, and then they all end up on stage to do Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll by Ian Dury at the end, and it's a right knees up. It's a right new wave knees up. And again, cheap as chips on Discogs. And then we've got another 1979 one. And it's a soundtrack, and it's a great soundtrack. It's the soundtrack to the film That Summer, which I must admit I've never seen. I ought to check it out, didn't I, seeing as I like the soundtrack so much. So this is a belter. It's always on a nice gatefold sleeve. Again, under a £5 on Discogs. Ian Dury, Mink DeVille, Elvis Costello, Boomtown Rats. But then you've got like Zones, Only Ones, Patti Smith, Richard Hell, The Voidoids, Blank Generation. That is such a good song. Undertones, Ramones. It's just a great like punk and new wave collection. It almost like as punk was drifting slightly more into new wave, this is almost like the crossover. It's not a very exciting album cover. Maybe that's why it gets overlooked. Like, essentially, Duncan Goodhue. I don't know who the swimmer is. I've not seen the film. I think the film's got Ray Winston in it, so it's one I ought to check out, really. But it's a really good collection. And again, under a £5 on Discogs, usually under a £5 in record shops. Then from 1980, we've got another soundtrack. I didn't bunch these together. Like I said, they're just in release year order. And that's the Breaking Glass soundtrack. Now, this is a couple of quid everywhere. I got my copy for £1 and it's pristine. I even got a beautiful promo one-sided copy for £1. This record doesn't cost a lot wherever you go. So it's the soundtrack to a film about a rising punk star that's trying to make it and ends up selling out, and it's a really good film. Obviously the star is Hazel O'Connor, and this is her and her band doing all the songs. There's some you probably know on this one. Ones like, I think Willy was a big hit, wasn't it? But that's very, very slow. That's a bit slow for my short attention span, I must admit. An Eighth Day, I think, was a big hit. But there's some absolutely belting songs on this. It's as much keyboard driven, like synth driven, as it is guitar driven. So it's not just like guitar-y. It's very much in that new wave niche, because there's like guitars feature as prominently as synths, and sax features as prominently as everything. But there's some great stuff on it. Writing on the Wall, Big Brother, Who Needs It, Give Me an Inch, which I think is my favourite song on this album. 1980, we're still on 1980. And the new wave produced some very odd acts, musical acts. And John Otway and Wild Willy Barra is one of the oddest, but absolutely brilliant. This is a bit tatty, this was like £1. So, if you don't know John Otway and Wild Willy Barrett, Wild Willy played guitar and John Otway sang pretty much, and that's about it. But this LP has got some more up-tempo stuff on it, like Birthday Boy, and then some slower stuff. There's a cover of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and it's quite difficult to describe. It's kind of like DIY a bit punky, very much new wave. Some of it has got like an absolutely pounding, driving beat and chugging guitars. Some of it's a little bit more laid back. John Otway's vocal style was to just kind of talk, not like rapping or just talk through songs. I personally love it. It kind of divides opinion. I think it is genuinely a bit Marmitey. Some people like, I really don't get that. And there's some people I've talked to that are like, oh, John Otway and Wild Willy Barra, I love them. And it's a strange, makes a strange divide. But, again, a couple of quid on Discogs. Definitely under a £5 wherever you go, pretty much. Don't pay more than a £5 for it. Worth checking out. We've got 3 left, so that means we've had 7. Again, from 1980. This has definitely got more pop vibes, but there's still a strong kind of new wave vibe to it. And that's The Photos, their self-titled LP. It's got, I think, it's got some great kind of power pop. It's definitely not punk, but it's got that punky vibe to it. One like Do You Have Fun, Irene, that's a corker. Friends, there's some absolutely great songs on this. There's some slightly more poppy songs. Again, another band that I think you could tell they had their eyes set on top of the pops. Not quite as aggressive as some of the like original 77 punk bands, but keeping a little bit of that edge, but also introducing a poppy edge. Yeah, I think there's some melodic belters on this, and again, 3 to 5 quid, definitely reasonable wherever you go. Another 1980 belter, and that's the first album by the Psychedelic Furs. Sometimes this is, I've seen this in pink with green shadows, sometimes it's green with pink shadows. And it's almost like, it's a little bit dirgy, very guitar-y. I wonder if bands like the Sisters of Mercy and the Jesus and Mary chain kind of spent a lot of time listening to this, because it feels like the start of that kind of style of music. But it's very, very catchy. And just all round a really good, surprising album that's a bit slower, really rather guitar orientated, but very melodic songs that just get stuck in your head for so long. So I think this is an absolute belter for under a £5, and you can find this in lots of places for under a £5. And the last one, we're jumping ahead to 1986, which is nearly 10 years after punk kind of really broke. But I wanted to include this one because I think this has that DIY punk and like total new wave aesthetic to it. And that's Boston Steve Austin by We've Got a Fuzzbox and We're Going to Use It. Now, these girls made an absolute racket. You get the feeling that they weren't, and I mean this affectionately, the most competent musicians. You know, this isn't like a prog rock album. This is just like some lasses with some guitars and drums making a racket. But it's a hummable racket. It's a racket that gets stuck in your head. Now, these are a prime example of a band that started off like this and essentially had their sights set on top of the pops, which I can't blame people for. You know, if you do your thing, if you start doing something and somebody comes along with a big bag of cash and says, you can have this bag of cash if you make it more poppy, more accessible for everyone, we'll get you on top of the pops, you'll make a fortune. There's bands I love that have stuck with their original underground ethics and just carried on doing what they do, and that's brilliant. But I get it when people are like, yeah, we've got an LP out, but if we start to drift towards something a bit poppy, something a bit more commercial, we're going to make lots of money. I can't knock anybody for making the financial decision there. But yeah, this is another. I think because of their pop pedigree, I think this gets overlooked, and people maybe think it's probably a bit more poppy than it is. But it's a belter. These lasses make an absolute racket, and it's great fun. So, what else has been happening this week? Well, I made a little hat for Victor out of the top of a deodorant can. And it was on him for so long, I think he forgot it was there, and it made him jump when it fell off. He never, ever fails to amuse me. Right, so I shall leave it there. If you've enjoyed this video, I think I might, let me know, and I think I might do like great punk LPs that you can get for around about a tenner. Because punk is a little bit more expensive than the kind of new wave power pop type stuff. But thank you for watching, you lot, and I will see you all. If you want to bob back for some horror book nonsense, that's on Wednesday. If you're just here for vinyl records, then I'll see you a week from today on Sunday. Thank you for watching, guys, and I'll see you all soon.